I'm Evan Smith. I'm the co-founder and former CEO of the Texas Tribune, now a senior advisor at Emerson Collective. Welcome to the 2025 Texas Tribune Festival and to this conversation with Chris Hayes, whose latest book, here it is, The Sirens Call, How Attention Became the World's Most Endangered Resource, was published in late January and debuted at, wait for it, #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. Chris was born and raised in the Bronx. His dad was a community organizer. His mom was an educator. Both were also civil servants who worked for the city of New York. Graduate of Brown University, he spent a decade writing about politics and progressive issues, first for the Chicago Reader, then In These Times, and finally The Nation, where he rose to be Washington, D.C. editor. In 2010, he began guest hosting prime time shows on what was then MSNBC. And the following year, he was given a 2-hour show of his own on Saturday and Sunday mornings called Up with Chris Hayes. Less than 2 years later, he took over the weeknight slot right before Rachel Maddow and launched All In, which I should note, as of this morning, airs on MS Now.
Correct.
Happy first day with the new brand. For the last 7 years, Chris has also been the host of a weekly podcast, Why Is This Happening? He's the author of 2 other best-selling books, Twilight of the Elites, America After Meritocracy, and A Colony in a Nation. I have truly lost count of how many times Chris has been to the Texas Tribune Festival. It may be 5, it may be 6, I don't know. Thank you, man. Thank you.
I love coming.
It is always a real treat for us to have him here, but especially in a news moment like this one, please welcome Chris Hayes. Yes. So let's talk about the book first, and we'll talk about the world, okay? So this is a book about attention, about the pursuit of it, about the exploitation of it, and about the perils of that exploitation. That's fair.
Yeah, I mean, I think I came to conclude, I think partly slightly overdetermined by my professional occupation,
right,
that attention is the sort of defining resource of our age. Yep. That in a kind of, in a world that's driven by bits and atoms, bits rather than atoms, right? Where controlling the digital landscape is kind of the most important thing. We've made the mistake, I think, to think that the thing that is valuable is information rather than attention. But information isn't really the valuable thing because information is essentially infinite, boundless, replicable. Information can stay in multiple places at one time. A great example being, if you think about your own personal data,
yep,
right? Right now, I don't know, how many firms have my data? 100, 1,000?
A lot.
10,000? It doesn't make that big a difference in my daily life if it's 1,000 or 10,000. How many things have my attention in each moment? That is a question that there's only one answer to.
Yep.
Because that's finite. And the fundamental concept to sort of think about, and this is, raised by a brilliant thinker named Herb Simon in the 1970s, is that information consumes attention. Which is to say, the more information there is in any given organizational system, in any given environment, the greater the draw on attention.
Can we define terms here at the beginning? I mean, it feels weird for me to have to say to you, what do you mean by attention? But since that is the through line in this book, I want to ask you, what do you mean by attention?
William James in the Principles of Psychology has a sort of landmark quote about this, where he says it's the taking up of the mind of one thing and the putting aside of another, right? So the metaphor we use sometimes is the spotlight or the flashlight of thought. Our intuition about, like right now, for instance, you guys all, as far as I can tell, seem to be paying attention, which is to say, volitionally and with your conscious mind, you're exerting through will what you want your mind to focus on. And we call that faculty voluntary attention. That's one aspect of attention. There's another faculty of attention, which is involuntary attention, which is if someone came crashing through those doors right now screaming, everyone in the room would suddenly pay attention to that, whether you volitionally chose to or not. This is key, right? You're walking down a street, a siren comes, a car honks its horn, a baby wailing on an airplane. that faculty of involuntary attention is the origin of the faculty itself, because it's the evolutionary kernel of why you need attention, because you need to be alerted to danger. And these two faculties are constantly in interplay, right? This sense that we have in the attention age of we're struggling like a kind of rider on a bucking bronco to master and control this wild thing that is our attention, is because we don't actually fully control it.
Yeah.
And then the last faculty, the last part of attention in this triad, is social attention, which is both the attention we pay to other people and, crucially, the fact that attention can be paid to us. And that this form of attention is very close to the connectivity and the kind of foundation for all of the forms of social life and socialization that make us have a meaningful life. But while it's necessary for that, it's not sufficient, and this is key. To be paid attention to is the necessary precondition for a great friendship or a loving romantic relationship or a connection with your son or daughter or mother or father. But more than attention is necessary for a truly good relationship. And one of the perils of this age is confusing attention for love, for care, for relationships.
I've heard the phrase attention economy over the last 3 days at this festival. I can't even say how many times. It keeps coming up over and over again. Back to defining terms. What is the attention economy as it relates specifically to the thesis of this book?
I think there's two ways to think of it. So one is the specific technological, legal, and market institutions that attempt to harvest our attention and sell it. Yep. And our attention is being harvested and sold since probably the dawn of Benjamin Day's penny press in the New York Sun in the 19th century, when he's really the first one who has the idea,
right,
if you basically give away the paper and make a loss on that, but you charge advertisers, you can sell the audience to advertisers. So that fundamental model is the model of radio, of network television. It's half of the model of cable news. It pays my paycheck, thank you very much, so we like that. That model, so when we talk about the attention economy, we're talking about the parts of the economy and the specific setup at any given moment by which attention is captured and then sold, right?
Monetized.
The other way I think to think about attention economy is economy in the more sort of like pre-capitalist sense, and in going back to the original sort of origins of the word in its ancient Greek, which is economos, which is like the arranging of a household. And when we think of it more akin to what anthropologists would call a gift economy. So another way to think about attention economy is the way attention flows amongst people. Part of the reason that we can analogize attention to we can think about an attention economy is that, for instance, right now, I could use the attention that you have very kindly given me to talk about a colleague of mine, right? And put the attention on them. Or if I was giving a paper at a university, I might ask someone to stand up who's my research assistant, right? And in that way, the attention is actually flowing. It doesn't stop with me. It goes through people who can then give it to other people. And through that complex interplay that happens, you get something like a gift economy, right? People reciprocate each other with attention. Large platforms can aggregate attention and then give it to other people. So these are sort of two different ways, I think, of thinking about that phrase.
I'm glad you mentioned the penny press and the fact that this is not a new concept, because as you point out in the book, it's been true for a very long time that attention is a kind of resource that has value. And as you say, if you can seize it, you seize that value. You mention demagogues, showmen, preachers, great salespeople, holy men and women who have rallied disciples. All of them have essentially been trading in the currency of attention forever. So I want to know, who are the villains of this story? Who are the attention capitalists who are figuring out how to weaponize and monetize our attention for their benefit?
I mean, right now, what we call the platforms, which are some of the most profitable corporations that have ever existed in human history, that have a few features that I think make them truly kind of out past the frontier of what we had before. First of all is the scale, literally billions of users in dozens, if not hundreds of countries.
Right.
Second of all is the constant access to us because of the phone device, where you're talking about, literally trillions of human hours every week that they are harvesting. So they're doing this at a scale that has never been done before.
Right.
And they're also using fairly sophisticated technology, including the first real consumer-facing machine learning at scale, the algorithm, right, which is a technology related to what we now call AI, right, this sort of iterative improvement.
Right.
To kind of cultivate, to capture in us that faculty for compelled attention as opposed to voluntary attention. So that they have created there's a market situation and a technology that is highly engineered to capture our compelled attention at all times and then to monetize that. And I think that has created a deep, profound, ubiquitous alienation.
If you ask anybody these days, what's the problem with the world? The answer is some version of subject, verb, the algorithm.
Yeah.
Right? Does blaming the algorithm let us off the hook too much? The fact that we're so susceptible to it, is the problem the big bad tech companies, or is the problem weak us?
I think in all of these cases, it's always some combination. But I think that, cigarettes are a great example, right? I mean, we have a biophysical receptor for nicotine in our brain, an endogenous nicotine receptor.
Yep.
The nicotine binds to that receptor. It produces a feeling. That's just our chemical inheritance, and it is the thing that makes smoking appealing and makes quitting smoking difficult. Now, different people find different ways to deal with that biological reality. And this is even truer, I would say, of our relationship to food. I mean, the example that I give in the book, which I think is the most useful analogy to think about, is our relationship to our own appetites is the closest thing we have of our relationship to our own attention. We can't escape our own appetites the same way we can't escape our own attention. You're going to be paying attention to something at all times, and you're going to have to eat. And in the same way that we have this kind of voluntary part of our attention and involuntary, with our appetites, we have something similar, which is that we've got a whole bunch of biological inheritances from evolution about things that we like generally throughout the world. The reason that Coca-Cola can sell Coca-Cola everywhere is because that sweetness and the sugar molecule does something specific to us physiologically. But we also have all of the incredible, manifold scope and scale of human appetite, right? People eat whale flesh that's been buried under the ground, and they eat cheeseburgers, and they eat sushi, and they eat fava beans, and yada, yada. And much of what we think about when we think about the food industrial complex is this sort of interplay between what the large food concerns are trying to do at scale to get at that biophysical part of us, and then the other parts of cuisine that are all the things that we do to make Sunday dinner or to make a small little restaurant, right? And so we've got a real Coca-Cola and McDonald's problem with our minds.
But the difference is there's no attention Ozempic.
There's not, and believe me, it would be amazing if there were.
Right.
I mean, and honestly, who knows?
I mean, maybe there is one actually, right?
Or there might be one on the horizon. I mean, I think the GLPs, in some ways, part of what makes them so seismic and revolutionary is precisely because they are the first time that problem has been dissolved at the biophysical level. 100%. Right? Like it's never been happening. And people have obviously struggled with this for very long periods of time.
Right.
Yeah, you do wonder if there's something like that. I mean, there are practices we can do, but to get back to your original question, yes, how we encounter it is partly a matter of will. But at scale, the issue is both the technology, the market structure, and the regulation or lack thereof that produce what we have now.
The message of this book, as I took away from reading it, is that attention capitalists degrade us and they degrade politics. Talk about each.
Yeah, so I think when you have, we all have this sort of notion of what something that's tabloid is. When you think about something that's tabloid, a literal sense, what you're thinking about is the tabloid papers that were first sold by all appearing in one place in a very competitive attention marketplace. So, like, if you think about the supermarket checkout counter, right? How does the supermarket checkout counter work? There's a finite amount of space, and there's a competition between what's the thing you're going to impulse purchase. if you think about Times Square, if you've ever been to Times Square, if you think about the floor of a casino, right? All of these have in common that they are competitive attentional marketplaces where there is this race to the bottom effect. If you create a universe in which that is the dominant form that people get their news and information, everything gets casinoized and tabloid. And increasingly it's the case, just as an empirical matter, this is how people find out about the world.
Right.
And so increasingly we select for the things that can best capture attention. And it is not at all an accident that a creature of 1980s New York tabloid world, which is the closest you have as an analog to this current attentional environment, Donald Trump is the one who has dominated politics in this.
He really does in this moment when attention is the coin of the realm. You have an attention junkie as president. He's perfect. His rallying cry is me, me, me. So in some ways, he has risen to meet the moment.
He has, and he also, you know, one of the lessons of, there's a famous P.T. Barnum quote, right, where he's talking to a reporter who's doing a profile of him, and she says that she's going to have some negative things. He says, I don't care, as long as you get my name right, P-T-B-A-R-N-U-M, right? Sort of all publicity is good publicity. Like, this is very much the ethos of that 1980s New York tabloid world. And it's also, I think, aligns with what is in him just an inescapably feral, deep part of his psychopathology.
You say in the book, he doesn't care if the attention is positive. Speaking
That's
of Trump.
the key innovation. The key innovation about him is chasing attention even when it's negative attention. Most politicians, this is really, I think, the real transformative aspect. Most politicians choose no attention over negative attention. They would rather there not be news about them than there be a negative story on the front page. And Donald Trump would rather there be a negative story on the front page than be no news about him. And that is very, very different than the way most politicians operate.
Right.
But turns out to be relatively well optimized for the environment we're in.
If there are villains in this book, who are the heroes?
Well,
every good story has villains and heroes.
I mean, I think in some ways the heroes have yet to emerge, which is partly why I wrote the book. I think we're in this really interesting moment where things are very unsettled. The thing you said before about subject, verb, and algorithm, like one of the things I say in the book is that this feeling of alienation we have, alienation from our own attention, even in the course of me writing the book, went from feeling like an insight to a cliche. Like when I pitched the book, I was like, I would tell people I'm writing a book about attention. They'd be like, oh, that's interesting. And by the time it came out, I was like, well, yeah, obviously. And it's almost become like air travel or traffic, right? Like it's a thing you could talk about at your barbershop or in a grocery line or at a family dinner.
And everybody agrees.
Yeah, everyone is like, this sucks. I don't like this. I don't like sitting in traffic, right? I don't like commuting on I-35 rush hour. And so in that sense, what you have, I think, is this very powerful combination of things, which is a mass sense of alienation, a mass rebellion against the status quo, without yet the forms of opposition catalyzing and the leaders to pursue what would be something different.
But it would seem like, to me at least, that there's an opportunity for somebody to come along and be the white knight here.
I mean, one place you're seeing this, Jonathan Haidt's book about this.
That ultimately resulted in a nationwide movement. I don't know if you can say it was because of him.
I think of that book. I mean, him in that book has led to state after state, red and blue, conservative, liberal.
Uniform acceptance of the idea that phones should be out of schools.
Yes. Which, by the way, is such an obvious point. It's insane that it wasn't.
There was pushback initially, was there not?
There was pushback. I mean, there was, neurotic parents who were like, I have to text my kid during the day. It's like,
I can't find my kid if I don't have access to his, the Find My app, right?
Although one of the points that I would make is that I do think the next place for the conversation to go, I think there's a fair amount of displacement that happens on this issue onto won't someone think of the children? The problem was us as much as the kids. Like every single parent has had this experience of your kid coming up to you and being like, can I have screen time? And you're like, no, just figure out what to do. I don't know, go up to your room or something. Like every parent has done that. And if you go to, we talked about taking them out of schools. if you go to a grown-up, an adult business conference or anything, like, it's a problem in all of those environments. And it's
and the people who run those conferences or run meetings and say, we're going to have no devices in these meetings, everyone's like murmuring narc under their breath.
So this is one place that I think you're going to see a change that I think will be cultural, which is an expectation of more and more spaces not having phones.
Device free,
like like public spaces, restaurants,
yeah,
conferences.
I remember being in a bakery in Burlington, Vermont this summer, and there being little signs on the tables that said no laptops. And they had a list of coffee shops around the corner where you could bring your laptop. And people, when they came in for the first time, saw this, they were just taking umbrage at the this is liberty, freedom. I should be able to do what I want. But that maybe is going to become more of the norm.
I mean, I think my strong sense is in 20 or 30 years, we'll look back at when you look at video of people in the, today, it'll look like the smoking of the 1950s and 60s, where like you're like watching some like college lecture in a basement with no windows and everyone is just smoking. It's like,
everyone's got a butt out.
Are you out of your mind? What are you doing? You can't do that. And I think eventually the way that we all, the sort of dead-eyed way that you see everyone looking now will look that way.
So 2 more questions on this, and then I'm going to move on to talk about the world we're in. Democracy is threatened how by this? That's the question we should be asking always of everything.
Yeah.
Democracy's threatened how?
I think that where we've ended up, which is the control of a very small number of outlets that have kind of created these apex predators that really do chase out everything that competes with them at scale, and now control how everyone sees information. I mean, like the New York Times, the cathedral of journalism, right? Whatever your feelings about it, like the most storied institution, they're doing a ton of vertical video. And why are they doing a ton of vertical video? How else are young people particularly going to see their stuff? And they're doing a great job of it. And I don't, as someone who talks on, into a camera for a living, like I don't begrudge anyone doing video. But it cannot be the case. I think about it like an ecosystem. Monocultures are susceptible to plagues.
Right.
If you only have one kind of crop and a boll weevil comes across and it takes the whole crop out, you're screwed. And any ecosystem that is too dependent on one point of failure is going to be very, very weak and vulnerable. And increasingly, the idea that all of the information people get about the world comes through a few platforms, through a few specific forms of those platforms, is wildly dangerous as a single point of failure. Not just in terms of what incentives it has, which I think are often negative, right? I mean, the thing about journalism is, say whatever you want about, legacy journalistic enterprises, they do have a set of values in addition to their attentional ones. Like, I have to get people's attention for my show, but it's not all I care about, right? The platforms, it's literally all they care about. There is no other.
And so we're clear, when you say platforms, you're not just talking about big, bad, evil social media. You're talking about platforms that are not necessarily social media.
I'm mostly talking about social media. I mean, I don't even think you could call it social media anymore. I think social media actually is almost a misnomer. What began as social media has become something more like extremely algorithmically sophisticated, addictive, constant TV with no individualized and with no sense of anything like what the mid-century networks had or my network have, which is alongside this imperative from a business perspective to get people's attention, the ethos around informing that makes journalism and that is necessary for a functioning republic. If you strip that out and you just say, look, you're going to sit at the slot machine and our job from the platform perspective is just to get you to watch as much as possible, and we don't care if what you're watching is a bunch of videos about how the Jews killed Charlie Kirk.
True or false doesn't make a difference.
No,
right.
Well, it doesn't care. Every time that some video comes up about some wildly wrong anti-Semitic conspiracy theory,
yep,
it's just more minutes in the pocket of TikTok and of ByteDance and Meta.
So I said there were no heroes or asked about whether there were heroes yet. The reality is, it seems to me, that we may be the ones we're looking for, right? Like no one is coming to save us. We have to save ourselves. You list some things in this book. You talk about some things. You say, I read newspapers. Like read a newspaper. That's one alternative. I mean, I wonder about limiting screen time. Why is it only kids who have to limit screen time? Why can't we just say voluntarily we see the value of limiting screen time?
Absolutely. And I think creating spaces and cultural expectations around not having it. I think an institution like the Texas Tribune is one of the heroes here, right? Like it's really important. And I think, I write in the book about Whole Foods, which was born of the merger of two different sort of hippie natural food stores here in Austin.
We know that story well.
Of course. And the really important thing to remember that, like in the same way that sign on the Burlington table felt like a little like eye-rolly and hippie and whatever, that's how natural food stores felt.
Once upon a time.
For a really long time. Like, okay, whatever. But what they were doing is they were pioneering and innovating a model that was in opposition to the worst excesses and depravities of global homogenized capitalist agriculture and food distribution. And so the things that start to push against this are going to start small and going to be a little eye-rolling.
And they may seem unlikely now, but
exactly.
But wait, I'm assuming that there's been a QR code that's been up on the screen. I believe there will be one. We're going to have questions at about 1:15 the hour, and we'll have a great reporter for the Texas Tribune. Ask them on your behalf. Please be sure to submit questions. Okay, on to the fun stuff. I don't mean to go all politico on you, but who won the shutdown?
I think in political terms, in narrow political terms, amoral political terms, the Democrats won the shutdown. I think part of what made the end of it so strange was that, and again, I kept an open mind about it. Like, I just think if the overwhelming balance of the data that we have, which is two things, polling and an actual election taking place
objectively, the results of election day.
during the shutdown, was that people blamed Trump, they blamed the Republican Party. It 100% increased the salience of the one issue that Democrats are the most trusted on, which is healthcare. And this shellacking of an election, which genuinely was like a true ass kicking, took place against his background.
Not just the fact of the victories, but the margins of the victories.
The margins, and then the places, the fact that, something that people forget about that 2018 election, the first Trump midterm, was that, and this is very true in Texas, and in fact, I remember being here in Texas on election night in El Paso in the baseball stadium where Beto was having his event. When the numbers started coming out from Harris County and Dallas-Fort Worth suburbs, Republicans were like, oh, Cruz is cooked.
Well, in fact, I think Beto won the early vote in Tarrant County. Ultimately, right?
Yeah.
And everyone was like, oh, whoa, this is going to be different.
So the reason he wasn't cooked was because the margins moved further than anyone thought possible in West Texas and the reddest areas of the state. And what I mean by that is that 2018 election, even though Democrats did well as a top line, if you looked underneath the hood of it, the Trumpiest places in America got even Trumpier in 2018, and the anti-Trump places got even anti-Trumpier, and particularly these suburbs that had been kind of Romney Republican redoubts moved for the Democrats. And what happened was that movement netted out to Democrats' benefit. That's not what happened in the election 2 weeks ago. Everywhere moved. Every demographic moved in the same direction. Now, different amounts. Every single county in Virginia moved towards the Democrats. So you're not looking at, 2018 was like, oh, there's this weird realignment happening and there's this sort of trading of voters happening where in 2016, the trade netted out to Trump's benefit because of the Electoral College.
Right.
In 2018, it netted out to Democrats, right? What you saw in the election 2 weeks ago was movement every way in every direction. And that's, I think, a scarier proposition for the Republican Party, even in those 2018 results.
As you know, no one self-flagellates like a Democrat, though. And what's happening is a lot of Democrats are self-flagellating over the end of the shutdown because they think they caved at their moment of maximum leverage. You don't think so?
No, I think they did, but I also think, well, here's the thing that I found very difficult about the end of the shutdown. You got to give people, you have to have a public reason for why now, and there wasn't one. So think of this. Let's imagine they held the shutdown for 5 more days, and in that time, the legal challenges to the Trump administration's refusal to use a $5 billion contingency fund to pay SNAP had gone up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court had definitively said, we are allowing them to not pay SNAP now pending litigation, which meant it's not happening for a while. And then the Democrats said, you know what? We're the only responsible party in Washington. We're trying to balance a bunch of equities to make sure that like a bunch of people don't get hurt on the health insurance side, but this is a brutal price to pay. And because the Republicans don't care, we're just going to say uncle and end the shutdown because the balance has gotten too out of whack. That's a perfectly defensible, reasonable why now.
But that's not what they said.
No.
Yeah.
And instead what they said was like, oh, blah, 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 blah. And that's partly because what really was, I mean, from the reporting I've done, like, there was no grand, there was no Chuck Schumer master plan to make this happen. It would be very weird if there were, because he looked terrible. Like, it'd be very weird to be like, I, the leader, got, sabotaged by 8 of my members, but I really wanted them to do it. No, the people that voted to end it were antsy from the beginning and basically lost their nerve.
Right, but there were a bunch of them who were leaving the Senate. I mean, the irony was that the kind of, the people who were making peace with the Republicans to end the shutdown were people who are not going to have to be around long enough to live with the consequences of this.
Yes.
Right?
In some cases, not all, but in some cases.
But in some cases. So now there's going to be allegedly a vote on extending the Obamacare subsidies or something related to the presumed increase in healthcare costs that will result if they do nothing. There's no way that the math on that's going to work out for the Democrats, is it?
No, although let me make a point that a lot of people that went through the sort of Ted Cruz inspired shutdown that happens in 2013.
Yeah.
And a lot of Republicans particularly, I think their mental model was that this was similar to that. But I want to make a key distinction why I think actually the Democrats did so much better politically. The 2013 shutdown was, again, continuing like a funding of the government bill in which they wanted to basically defund Obamacare, right? It's not an ask you can say yes to, right? Like the Democratic Party Barack Obama just won re-election. Having done the ACA, they're not going to be like, okay, on second thought, scrap the ACA. Never going to happen. The ask from Democrats was nowhere near that crazy. In fact, to be totally honest, in narrow political terms, in terms of what would be best for the electoral prospects of the Republican Party in the next election, them just extending the subsidies for 3 years, I think is 100% the best thing.
They should have taken the deal.
They should take the deal. Yeah. It was, honestly, first of all, it's substantively the right thing to do. It's going to keep people's costs down. It's politically the right thing to do.
Right.
And it was not an insane ask like scrap the ACA. So there's going to be a vote. I think they're so ideologically resistant to it that it will fail. But I also don't think it's a crazy thing for them to keep pressing on.
But then the Republicans own the consequences
of
the increase in healthcare costs.
Which, by the way, just to be clear, like I just did open enrollment. It's not just that premiums are going up on the exchanges. They're going up everywhere. Now, there's a complicated reasons for that. But one of them is, the larger the risk pool, the lower the premiums, generally, as a just general principle. The smaller the risk pool, the higher the premiums. Well, the Biden administration did a lot of stuff to extend out the risk pool. Right. The Trump administration has been unwinding. So this is not just like an act of God.
Let me ask you the question that we asked actually as the basis for a panel a couple of days ago, and is being asked increasingly after the end of the shutdown. Can the Democratic Party be saved? And I'll kind of add as an addendum to that, does it need to be saved?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, what ends up happening in politics all the time is that people look at 2 dots and they draw a line through it and they're like, well, this is just going to go forever.
It's a trend.
I mean, if you extrapolate out, 99% of young men will be Republican for the next 100 years. I don't think that's going to be the case. I've been through so many cycles of permanent Republican majority, permanent Democratic majority.
You've heard all that, right?
It's like for a bunch of structural reasons, the nation has this kind of 50-50 polarization. I do think there's an opportunity for someone to crack the puzzle and to create something that looks like either the FDR New Deal coalition or the Reagan majority that no one quite has figured out. I think Barack Obama came very close, and in some ways, but for a few accidents and quirks of history, I think would have.
Well, doesn't it begin with a person who is that flag carrier or standard bearer?
That is a huge part of it, yes.
Okay, who is it?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, I don't even know if we know the name right now of the nominee.
On the Democratic side?
Yeah.
You know the name on the Republican side? Vance-ish?
My personal belief is that I hate making predictions because God knows what's going to happen.
It's cost-free.
Right, which is also why I hate it. My strong instinct is that Donald Trump's vanity will require someone with the name Trump to be the nominee.
Tiffany?
One of them. I mean, I don't know. No, Tiffany. He keeps forgetting Tiffany.
My money's on Tiffany.
Or Tiffany.
Yeah,
Jesus
all right.
Christ. No, I don't think he is fundamentally a kind of aspiring monarch more than anything, and I think that that would be my bet if I had to bet.
Monarchs like lineage.
Yeah, he doesn't like Fred Trump gave the family business to his kids, and he's given over. I mean, Eric's running around making billion-dollar corrupt crypto deals with.
He got the #1 book on the bestseller list ahead of Andrew Ross Sorkin. That tells me everything I need to know, right?
Exactly.
Eric Trump is a world beater. Do the Democrats have a gerontocracy problem, or have we made too much of this?
No, they do. 100% do. Yeah. I think. Yeah, man, you gotta move on. And,
Name your targets.
well, I mean, I think anyone over 75 running for re-election, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. And you've seen, there's just a few really interesting examples now where, a young insurgent primary challenger declared in Illinois 9 in Jan Jakowski's district, had a huge quarter. She announced she's not running. A pretty savvy challenger declared Nancy Pelosi's district. Then another one declared Nancy Pelosi's district. She announced she's not running.
Right.
Sometimes you got to be pushed.
The mere presence of the threat. I was reminded, Joe Kennedy III was here yesterday, and someone said, oh, he's still in Congress, right? I was like, no, remember what happened? He ran against Ed Markey, kind of in an early simulation of let's get the gerontocracy problem solved. He lost, but now Seth Moulton is running against Markey, and maybe Ayanna Pressley's running against Markey. Yep. So that's another one of those. Right?
I think you're going to see more and more. I think it's going to be a very interesting and very messy primary season for Democrats.
Should Schumer leave the stage? Well, in fairness, I was asking him, but anyway, yeah.
Well, I think the question is, what does leave the stage mean? I think, here's what I'll say about Chuck Schumer. The irony of Chuck Schumer is that he developed a set of tools and modes of doing politics that were incredibly adapted for a specific era. And we don't live in that era anymore.
The era has passed. Right. Okay. You want to do 6 minutes on Epstein before we go to questions?
Put it on the clock, yeah.
Is this going to amount to anything in the end?
What do you mean by anything?
Well, I mean, you tell me. I mean, there's, this last release of emails are ghastly and, kind of like suspicions confirmed on some levels. And
you think it's ghastly to email Jeffrey Epstein asking for dating advice? Or to email Jeffrey Epstein to make a crack about how Me Too has gone too far?
I mean, don't you think that we should be reacting to this in a way that has more urgency and emergency to it as a country, and yet people are like,
I don't know how much there is. I mean, look, there's a reason the Epstein story is so captivating, and it's because a combination of two things. He truly was this strangely Zelig-like figure in terms of how connected he was in the nodes and networks of American elite. I don't even know, honestly, this is something I wrestle with. I think some people have this conception that like, oh, there's a lot of Jeffrey Epsteins out there, but I actually think he was fairly sui generis. I don't think there's a lot of people that were that obsessive about being this kind of connector fixer figure. And also he was an evil sadist who sexually abused 1,000 women and girls. And then the third part of it is, and that was not a secret. So there's a reason that it's such a appalling story, and I think the emails that were released is a reminder of it. I mean, I think the birthday card that Donald Trump wrote him.
I mean, the thing is, let's be clear. We knew before this, the emails are confirmation of some of the stuff that we thought we knew, right?
Yes, although they're confirmation. Like, there's an email in there that's Ken Starr, who would lose his job at Baylor for covering up rampant and systemic sexual abuse, emailing Jeffrey Epstein to get a lawyer recommendation for a friend of his who was facing allegations of sexual misconduct and harassment.
Almost can't make this up.
And being recommended a lawyer at Yale Law School who would be investigated and suspended for sexual misconduct. That's like an actual email in there.
It's like the point.
By the way, let me just say this. One takeaway from the thing is like, we had Me Too for a reason, and maybe it's time to bring back some of that energy. Like, there's this sense that, and I will not, I would concede that there were absolutely individual instances of, I don't know, overreach or places where, there were accusations that maybe were not, fully found to be true. I mean, we're talking about like literally like thousands and thousands. So there's this sense of like Me Too went too far that really suffused the culture. And I think 2024 was kind of a Me Too backlash election in some way. I mean, I don't know if anyone's read the actual details of the rape allegation against the current Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who's accused of raping a woman at a conservative conference that she was attending with her husband and kids, who went to the hospital the next day for a rape kit. He vehemently denies this, but he settled a lawsuit with her, a civil lawsuit with her. He says that she's not telling the truth. Like, that's the Secretary of Defense. Even when I just said that just now, I can tell some people in the room don't even know about this allegation. Right. And there was this sense of like, we had Me Too, and there was this kind of almost sort of this like cleansing fire, this sort of revolutionary spirit, but maybe it went too far and it felt a little culture revolutionary, and it felt a little like, bring them to the guillotine and don't, everyone's guilty. And I think that sense of like, it all went too far, backlash really suffused the culture. But when you read the Epstein emails, it's like, oh, right, there was a reason that we had Me Too. Which is that, by and large, the systematic victimization and predation on women through all sorts of tiers of society accepted as the norm is appalling and still exists.
Will there be any consequences for the president as a consequence of the Epstein story?
I doubt there will be consequences, but I do think it genuinely politically hurts him. I think the vote next week is going to be super interesting. There's going to be a vote. It's going to be on Tuesday.
And a bunch of Republicans are going to end up voting for the release of the files, right?
This is what's super interesting about the vote on Tuesday. If you were paying me to advise the White House, which I don't do, I think what I would say to them is, don't whip the vote. Because if you whip the vote and you lose 50 people, it's going to look really bad. If you just say, you know what, it's not going to go anywhere in the Senate, and anyway, the president's never going to sign the bill, so like, you guys do whatever you want, but it's dead.
Also, if it's a hoax, why are you bringing Lauren Boebert into the Situation Room? Right? Like, I mean, they're acting, whoever said Bill Kristol, there was a Bill Kristol column on the Bulwark the other day, the headline of which was, boy, he's acting like he's guilty or something like that.
Yes, and again, I keep coming down to that birthday card is one of the creepiest things I've ever read in my whole goddamn life. Straight up. Like,
again, you can't make this stuff up. Let me invite Paul Cobbler, who's a reporter for the Texas Tribune, to come to the podium, and he'll ask questions that I hope he has received on your behalf of Chris.
Thanks, Evan. We have plenty. To start us off, we have Winnie from Plano, who asks, Trump craves publicity and seems to use this to his advantage. Why does this not seem to work for other politicians?
It's a good question. I write about this a little bit in the book about how non-transferable the Trump model seems. I mean, you really saw this in 2022 in the midterms, where you had Kari Lake, Blake Masters, Doug Mastriano, Herschel Walker to a certain extent, all losing races that were winnable. Mark Robinson is my favorite example, who was the lieutenant governor in North Carolina, who ran.
Upstanding citizen.
Yes.
Right.
A real gentleman. Who ran in North Carolina and got his clock cleaned. I think he got about 42% of the vote. So I do think, look, Trump has some genuine genius for this. He just does. It's it's a feral quality. I think it's largely instinctual. It's not particularly theorized. I do think the lesson, the transferable lesson is about being less risk averse vis-a-vis attention. And I think a great example of that is the shutdown. Like, the risk averse decision would have been to whip 8 votes for a continuing resolution like they did back in the spring and not have a shutdown. They took a riskier one for the purposes of attracting attention to an issue they wanted to bring to the fore. And that trade-off worked. And I don't think that calculation is the natural calculation that a lot of Democratic politicians make. So I think the transferable part about Trump is that whatever weird ability he has, I think is actually not that transferable.
This occasions that question you hear occasionally, will Trumpism survive Trump? It's not only about his ability to suck up all the attention, but it's also his ability to compel people to bend to his will.
Yeah.
That part is as important, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's certain things that will survive him and certain things that won't. And I also would say, just as a caution on all this, so that I'm not doing the drawing to the line between the two dots, there's a book that Thomas Edsall, great political observer and writer, wrote about Bush and Rove called Building Red America. And by the summer of 2008, George W. Bush was at 22% approval and couldn't even go to the RNC in St. Paul because he was such a hated figure. Like, I don't know where all this goes, but events are going to have a huge role in them.
The question we could be asking in 2 years is, can Trump survive Trumpism?
Right, or like,
rather than the inverse.
Or you may, I really think about Bush a lot because I remember him being this utter colossus.
And then he wasn't.
And then he was the opposite of one.
Yeah, Paul.
Bob from Dallas asks, how different would our world be if we held social media accountable for their content and removed their protection against being sued? I believe referring to Section 230. Yeah,
the Section 230 question is such an interesting one. This is part of the Telecommunications Act under Clinton. The idea is that in order for sort of platforms to be able to function, you can't have them be responsible for everything that someone posts on them. And in some ways, Section 230 was a huge part of the free and open internet. This is one of these issues where I'm genuinely torn and kind of convinced by whatever the last argument I read is. And I used to be very much pro keeping Section 230, and I thought taking it away would be a disaster. I think the degree to which we've lost the open internet means we have to, at the very least, reconceptualize it. I also think there's other ways to... The problem with 230 is you start to get into these content and speech questions, and I think one thing to do is to reframe regulation in terms of attention, which is to say, how can you think about regulating not what is in the social media, but how they're grabbing your attention and for how long? Which is a completely different window for thinking about it.
It's process and not substance.
Right, exactly. And the substance gets very thorny very quickly because we thankfully have a First Amendment. It is thankfully extremely strong. It's one of the strongest legal protections for speech that exist in the world.
Yeah. This reminds me of the debate over qualified immunity.
Yes.
With cops, right?
Which I think has gotten completely out of whack.
Yeah. Again, Paul.
Jackson from New Braunfels asks, how does mainstream news pick what they're going to cover?
That's such a great I laugh because it's a great question, and I've spent my entire career trying to answer that question. Much of what I write about in the book is my own struggle to answer that question every day, which is born of a whole set of competing and sometimes imperatives that are in conflict with each other, like what's important but what's attentionally salient. Sometimes those things go together, sometimes they don't. When they don't go together, what do? How do you keep the audience's attention? I mean, here's a great example, like the ballroom. We did a lot on the ballroom. The ballroom's a great story. I mean, it's an appalling story, but it's incredibly visually compelling. It's sort of shocking. It's dramatic. You know, in the list of things that Donald Trump has done, if you're ranking their moral seriousness, it's probably not in the top 1,000, right? I mean, like there are genuine rigorous estimates that 600,000 children in the global South are going to die because of what they did to USA.
Yeah, but doing the ballroom story is not like doing Kim Kardashian's bar exam.
No, correct.
I mean,
but it's an example of, and I'm clearly not above doing the ballroom story, right? I did a ton of the ballroom story, but my point is, there's always this complex alchemy of what your sort of judgment of what's important is, what's kind of driving the news that day, what's the most attentionally salient for your audience that you're just always every day navigating. And it's the hardest part of the job by far. It's the thing that takes the most out of me. It's the thing that I have the most, like I stay up in the middle of the night ruminating about, that I feel stalked by doing a bad job of. You know, have I lived up to the responsibility of the platform that I have? Have I talked enough about what's going on in Gaza, for example? I'm constantly haunted by these, and what I've come to is there is no definitive answer to the question that the questioner posed. It is always fundamentally a set of human judgment calls about how to balance these competing imperatives.
The subjectivity of it is inevitable.
Yes, and it drives me crazy when you'll recognize this, Evan. Like sometimes when you ask, like news people get very defensive about this question. Like they'll answer in this question-begging way. They'll be like, "It's news." It's like, well, what makes it news? Well, you kind of know it when you see it.
Right. Yeah. I love that, Paul.
Chuck from Austin asks, what do you think of the rise of Nick Fuentes as a popular social media figure on the right, and why is he so popular?
Oh, that'll be Nick Fuentes. That's an easy answer, right? We can just talk about that in 2 seconds.
I mean, we can talk. I have to say, I am truly like soul sick about what has been developing in the discourse around, particularly in the right, although there's a little bit of a horseshoe happening because I'll see people who were ostensibly on the left start to engage in this, which is, I don't know how much attention people play to Nick Fuentes or to...
I wonder actually if it's broken through.
Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson.
Yeah. This is an internal conversation or an external conversation?
You know, it's the most like vile and ancient calumny that, you know, Jews run the world, that Jews are inherently perfidious, that Jews are behind division, that Jews are behind pornography, that Jews have a specific predilection for sexual predation, that it overlaps with the Epstein story because it's like, well, here's a Jewish pedophile who was buddies with Ehud Barak, and maybe he was a Mossad agent. And the growth of this very old, extremely dangerous and vile form of anti-Semitic conspiracy theorizing, and the obvious power it has in the algorithm, is one of the most sort of upsetting developments in the moment. And to go back to the algorithm, it 100% is the case that the algorithm is doing this. And I know this because my algorithm does it to me. Like, I look at a lot of stuff about the Middle East. I look at a lot of stuff about Gaza, and there has been a tremendous amount of images coming out of Gaza that are some of the most awful images that I've ever seen in my life. A father carrying the limbs of his dead child in a plastic bag. What the algorithm does is like, oh, you're looking at images of Gaza. Here's stuff about the war. Here's criticism of the war. Now here's Nick Fuentes criticizing the war. Now here's Candace Owens criticizing the war. Now here's Candace Owens telling you how the Jews killed Charlie Kirk. Now here's Candace Owens telling you how it's the same people for the last 100 years who've been behind all our problems. It very clearly is the case that, A, there is an ancient power in this form of anti-Semitic conspiracy theorizing. It's independent of whatever the particular medium in a given age is. And also the media, the platforms we have right now are acting as an accelerant.
A number of people in polite society, in public life, whose attitude about Nick Fuentes is, it's kind of alarming, isn't it? It's startling.
I mean, when you have someone on Tucker Carlson's show saying we have to talk about American Jewry
we're doing this
as a phrase, and I say this, I'm not Jewish. My wife is half Jewish. We have my in-laws are Jewish. I have what I would say a mixed family. We celebrate Hanukkah and Passover in my family. We don't go to temple, but my father was a Jesuit seminarian. I was raised in the Catholic Church. I grew up in an incredibly, incredibly Jewish milieu in New York, where I went to Shabbat dinner and I went to bar mitzvahs, and it was very immersed, and have a sort of enduring. It's just very close to me, informative for me, what I've learned from Judaism, from Jewish people, from Jewish mentors. And one of the things I think is really important is that for people that have been, as I have been, very critical of the conduct of Israel's war in Gaza, to take an incredibly hard line on this stuff. It's a real responsibility, I think, of folks to really see this for what it is in this moment, and a specific moral responsibility, I think, for people who, again, rightly to my view, have been so critical of the war in Gaza.
Okay. Couple more, Paul.
Bethany, who is a transgender woman from Austin, asks, what do you think is driving the attention industry of anti-trans shock jocks, and what social implications do you think this has?
That's such a great, great question. I think, will you say the question again?
I can do that. This came from Bethany, who is a transgender woman from Austin, who asks, what do you think is driving the attention industry of the anti-trans shock jocks, and what social implications do you think this has?
I think fear, scapegoating, bullying, and targeting relatively powerless targets. I think there is actually something radical, and to me, bracingly beautiful and radical and courageous about deconstructing the inheritance of gender. I think that's completely liberatory, but it genuinely is at odds with a lot of the received beliefs people have. So that's part of it too. But the last thing I would say about this, and one of the things I think that we're maybe turning a corner on, is one of the things that happened in this last election, there is a desire to put all this attention on the lives and bodies of trans folks by the right now. And I think it was over 50% of the ad spending by the Republican candidate in Virginia, Winsome Sears Earl, I always get those two. Over 50% was basically anti-trans ads, and it completely fell on its face.
They didn't land at all.
They didn't land at all, and when you ask voters about this right now, the salience of this is just basement.
Right, but when you go back to the 24 election, I mean, those of us who live in big college football cities saw that Donald Trump is for you, Kamala Harris is for they, them ad repeatedly during college football games.
I saw it too, yeah.
The lack of salience in this election cycle is extraordinary considering the absolute salience in the previous and the spend in the previous.
Yeah, and I think it partly turns on some of this alchemy, but I would say that one of the Brittany, is it Bethany? Bethany's question, my hope is, and I've had multiple trans people in my life telling me this, of just like, leave us alone and let us live our lives. And I think actually there's a real message there that has a profound connection to some core American values, which is mind your own goddamn business and stay out of people's lives. Stay out of here's one. Stay out of the healthcare decisions that parents make with their kids. Like, how dare you tell me what I do with my kids' healthcare? How dare you? Like, you're not in my household. In my household, we as a family come together and we make decisions, and we make decisions in the best interest of our kid. And if that kid needs a certain kind of care, you, Governor Abbott, and you, President Trump, don't get to tell me that they don't get that care. And that is, I think, a framing for this that has some potency out beyond people that are maybe the usual suspects.
All right. It's 5 o'clock. Paul, thank you for the audience questions. Everybody, how fortunate are we to have Chris Hayes back? Give him a big hand. Thank you.
Thank you.